This is Holy Family School of Faith.
Hello and welcome to the table Conversations on Catholic Education. My name is Sebastian D'Amico, and joining me today is my colleague Nicholas Hinkle. You'll recognize him in front of his many books behind.
That is a dirty lie.
From his talk on how reading prepared him for college, and again, this is going to be one of the more deeper dives conversations where we let you guys in on something that just happens naturally at our meetings, and it's one of the most life-giving aspects of who we are, and it's just this way of life of talking about good things. And so we would have been doing this naturally anyway. So we thought we'd have you guys join us for this. The topic, very loosely structured, is reading out loud and what that's done. What that does to the human soul, how that educates us. And I think it goes overlooked, honestly, because it's so simple. Sometimes it just seems like it just seems like something childish, to be perfectly honest. Maybe for those of us that have deep affinity to it, I don't mean that as an insult at all, but I don't know, Nick, when you think back on the things that were read out loud to you, what are the books that you remember being read out loud to you that really marked you?
Yeah, I mean, I forget if I said this in my video, so forgive those of you who struggled through that. The Chronicles of Narnia, definitely, that I can remember. Just, I mean, those are excellent books, and obviously they've remained as a classic for a reason and are cited as some of the best, books in general, let alone like kind of fantasy books that really strike your imagination. But I just remember my dad. We have, actually, maybe it might be somewhere around here, well, around one of these bookshelves, that we got the just like a big fat book that was all of them just put together.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad wanting to read that to all of us, and I think I'd already like read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I loved it. But yeah, so he I guess what was cool about that was I remember him reading it to myself and all of my siblings. Other than, I think Claire was super young, and I'm not sure if Charlie was born yet, but my other four siblings, we were all being read to, and so I remember that because it was so cool to be like kind of all together as a family, all hearing the same book and all enjoying it. And we went through most of them. I think a few people might have dropped off towards the end, but I stayed till the end. That's for sure. Yeah. From the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe all the way to the last battle. And I just remember going through that series and knowing it started me thinking like, oh my gosh, because like reading it, I saw so many parallels between like scripture stories and between things that I'd heard like in my dad's lectures on, the Catholic faith, that it was obvious that these were like very packed and very strongly allegorical pieces that were meant to kind of draw the mind from what was being told to like deeper realities. And I didn't even know, I'm I want to reread the whole series now again because I know that I'll find even more there.
Yeah. Was it that's been my experience, particularly. Nick, for those of you who don't know, Nick is soon to be married in these next coming weeks, so that's super exciting. And I've been married for 10 years, and we've got 4 kids. And the last year and a half, we've been going through the Chronicles of Narnia, and that's been amongst our things, and that's been one of the greatest joys to read it. But my question for you, I don't know if our listeners know this, but Nick is one of
6 kids, one of 6 kids. Yeah.
And when he says he was there with his brothers and sisters, right? I have a mental image of what that looks like. That's a pretty good
because you had to babysit us back in college. So
it's true. It's true. I've known Nick since he was about the age of my kids right now, which my oldest is 8. You must have been younger than that when I knew you.
Yeah, I would have been.
But at any rate, tell me. Obviously, you were reading it, and you were pretty advanced, for lack of a better word, right? To be able to see the connections between the Chronicles of Narnia and everything in our faith, which is there for anyone that wants to see it. But what was your experience of your dad reading it to such a huge cross section of ages? Because I think that's probably what if someone's like, oh, I'm an adult and I don't even see those connections.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would imagine that. I mean, I think one of the things that, like, in my classes that I took in education that we learned about was just the incredible fact of the mind of children, that they really they are underdeveloped in certain areas, but that they can really pick up on things and really do some things well, even better, such as learning languages, things like that, than adults. So I think just because you're a young age doesn't mean you can't do some things very, very well. But that I think, as far as the, like, cross section and seeing, people from all sorts of ranges reading that one book, I think I'm not sure too many books that can do that, because I think C.S. Lewis was just the master of presenting something in front of you that I'm sure for myself when I was younger and read it, and for younger listeners would kind of just be kind of pondering those images as they're very rich and beautiful, just to hear the descriptions, but that for those who maybe have had some sort of experience, and I guess this would be the only reason I was able to kind of pick up on it was because I had the opportunity to go to my dad's classes on salvation history, and on I remember taking actually a class on theology of the body before I knew what sex was. So that's my experience. So just hearing things like that just mysteries of the faith that were given. So for those at that point were given to college students, like meant for college students, and I'd pick up on just a little bit of it. But that really helped to form me for then these books.
Yeah, that's hashtag Treble's son of a theology teacher trouble.
Right. Yeah.
Driving the and one who teaches college students at that. That's a whole different episode of the table. But I think it reminds me of something. I got to the good fortune of talking to an English teacher of mine who recently passed away. His name was Jim Taylor, and God rest his soul. May his memory be eternal, as they say in the East. He became an Eastern monk, an Orthodox monk, and he taught me English when I was in 5th grade. Before he was actually a monk at all, and he was just a normal Roman Catholic at the time, and he really changed my life. It wasn't at a Catholic school, and I was able to reconnect with him just a few months ago, prior to his passing, and we were talking about the Chronicles of Narnia, and I was telling him about my experience reading it to my kids, and he said, "Yeah, when I read it," and this man is a mentor to me in many ways, and he said something so surprising. He said, "Yeah, when I read the Chronicles of Narnia, I was just enjoying it. I wasn't looking for the deeper meaning." Mm. And it came out in our conversation that this is probably the mark of a lot of really great literature, is that it can withstand both readings. In other words, for the person that really wants to go deep, you can find the Chronicles of Narnia it's like an ocean. But if you also just wanted to enjoy it, to just wade through the story, as it were, like just to get your feet wet and just enjoy it, that I think is probably um, one of the most important aspects that we've lost about reading out loud. It doesn't have to be um, for a specific purpose of teaching the faith,
Mhm.
although it can be, and that will almost inevitably happen.
Mhm.
It's not that we don't want those things to happen, but to read just for the sake of reading um, is in a world where you could just turn on um, a screen, right? Or scroll through a screen and see instant entertainment. I wonder sometimes if we just haven't lost that capacity. Um,
Yeah, yeah. That's really a loaded um, advice or I guess insight that you have, because I really do think that one of the problems that I see in myself, I think that is created by just the fast paced um, get things done mentality that I think we have here in the modern United States, that it's really hard, especially I guess it's because school pushes me to kind of really skip past all the unnecessary stuff and get down to the center. And um, that there's a lot of people who are saying this is the best, most efficient way to do X, Y, or Z. And there are a lot of course, situations where that's a good thing, but that I think in especially in leisure and in human formation, that's those are places where like that's not an acceptable mentality to have, and it's hard to switch off that, to be able to slow down and say, why am I going on this walk when I could be, I guess I've thought about this a lot, that, because sometimes I want to take with me, a podcast or be doing something like multitasking, trying to get multiple things done, be watching something while I'm working out, things like that. But I think it's a good thing to try and resist that, because and just to say, no, listen, I'm just going to take this time and not worry about the fact that I'm not maybe optimizing my time, just to be able to have a more relaxed experience of this walk, of this video, rather than trying to work out while I'm watching it. That I think reading out loud is um, gets to the heart of that, because and I think it's not bad to be, like coloring or maybe drawing or doing simple things while you're listening to something being read out loud to you. But I think especially in the family setting, um, that's a time where you can't really be doing other things, especially if you're the one reading. But the other kids, if they're going to be paying attention, that they kind of just have to sit and listen.
yeah.
And that's something that really, and again, I said this in my video, it helped me in college later, but that's not the reason you should do it. That I think it's uh, uh, a need to be able to rest if you want to be able to like really enjoy it. Yeah, but I don't know, what do you think?
No, I think that's beautiful, and it rings true with a lot of things we that we're told by God that are good
Yeah.
for us. Right? There's a reason why He said on the seventh day that He rested, and um, that human beings, really, in a sense, the whole Old Testament is the story of how well did Israel understand that
Mhm.
commandment or not,
Yeah.
and what
Yeah.
happened when they did, which was fewer than when they didn't understand it.
Mhm.
And the I wonder sometimes, if you look at the stories of the Old Testament, I remember being taught this by your dad and by Mike. Nick's dad is Troy Hinkle, one of the founders of School of Faith. And when I remember when they told us in college that um, one of the operative patterns or ways of interpreting salvation history is that God wants to give us rest and that Satan wants to make you busy.
Mm.
And so Pharaoh, Moses, it's played out. One of the famous places is Moses saying, I need to take my people. Would you just let us go to go waste some time and kill some animals to God? We literally just need to go kill some time and some
Right.
animals. And Pharaoh says, how dare you take them away from their work? And he doubles their work. And incidentally, the first request of Moses is not
To
um,
let them go, let my people go.
it's
Yeah.
not political freedom. It's the capacity to have what you're calling leisure,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that was like a monumental shift because obviously at first glance, Exodus is about political freedom, and that is one aspect of it, but there's also a deeper an issue of the human heart. um, and I've always found that very moving and indicting, I suppose, too, because if I'm honest, I really have to focus if I'm going to read at night after the kids are in bed and I'm going to like make time to read. I have to intentionally leave the computer shut and leave the phone downstairs and be put in a place. Um, and every aspect of me doesn't want to do it. Like, I'd rather sit on the couch. I'd rather watch my favorite series. I'd rather uh, do a million other things because it's actually, there's like this little mountain that I have to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's just exhaustion of, no, I'm going to do something that's leisurely.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And I think, yeah, the thing that I've had to be reminded in this whole Corona thing that I've definitely slipped a little bit back into is that when you do say, you know what, I'm just gonna, relax and just, watch something or play video games. Maybe that's more of a temptation for me than you. um, but that every time if I make that decision and say, okay, I'm going to spend this afternoon doing that or whatever, that every time I want to just continue doing it because I'm still tired. Like when I'm like, okay, let's see, should I stop? Because it's not a restful thing. And yeah, this is maybe we're deviating from our topic. But maybe, yeah, to bring it around, I think the reason why it's not restful, I guess maybe simply, is that um we're being, I guess, we're not kind of exercising and stretching the things that need to be exercised and stretched, and that's kind of the um, human ability to wonder and to use your imagination, and that especially in movies and video games, that there's very little of that going on because everything's presented right to you. um,
I,
yeah, go for it. If you have anything else to say, I was just going to say that I think those things are then very much exercised when you read especially good books.
yes, yes, and there's I don't know. I think there's to I think I find it difficult to talk about the importance of reading out loud without identifying the parts of my heart that are fractured in these other ways. It's all of a piece in
Mm-hmm.
my mind. The one of our other colleagues, he works out in Cincinnati. Many of you guys will know him. His name is John Leindecker. He once described the 10 seconds after an episode is done on Netflix, where it says next episode will start
Right.
9, 8, 7. And of course, it's many of us have been in that situation. It's 12:30. You've already watched 3 or 4 episodes of whatever it is. And you know that at the end of the other episode, you're going to be just as hungry as you are at this moment. and you know you'll actually be more tired, your eyes will be more exhausted, um, and yet there's this desire, there's this sense like at the end of that movie, maybe then I will find, or at the end of that episode, then I will find what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And that's it's a form of hopelessness, right? Because you're actually looking for something deep and eternal.
Hmm.
But that's, and I don't know, I think there's something really important for us to reflect on in that, and to um, it manifest itself in any of a number of ways with this technology.
Yeah. 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 And that I think, I guess, to speak in, I guess, I think reading out loud it can be tough. It's, that I'm sure there were times that, myself or some of my other siblings complained they didn't want to, go read out loud, or things like that, or read as a family, or especially myself, forcing myself to try and read instead of, as you said, indulge in some sort of entertainment. That that is it is tough, but that I think the reason why I really loved it when I was a kid, and still love it, is because there isn't that sense of um, emptiness at the end.
Yeah.
Once you've really, I mean, it's the same as I would imagine most other things that are like a workout, or things that are, hard to get to begin, but once you end, you feel satisfied, because it really is, um, it's fulfilling a need that you have, a need for exercise in a way, a need for um, uh, fulfillment, and being fed, as you said, like that hunger, in a way that I think you don't ordinarily just kind of pick up in your day-to-day life. And that's kind of that need for a bit of silence and reflection. um yeah.
I love that, because there's um, you're right. Like you go to bed with a more full belly. Um,
Hmm.
at least
Hmm.
I've noticed that in myself. It's very difficult. I remember actually Father Scott Wallish. You were at, he was at St. James, right? When
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
I
yeah,
remember
yeah.
him,
I remember him before he was father,
well, of
before he
course.
was even
Well,
seminarian.
yeah, because yeah, we were um, both Father Scott and myself were students of Troy when Nick was a kid. For those of you that aren't following that little backstory, but Father Scott once he was on a retreat for, I think we were on guy time, just for the guys on this retreat, and he said, someone asked the question, why should I care about purity? And he said one of the most striking answers. He's like, because many of you don't know the joy of going to bed with a clear conscience. And I think there's something similar with when I've fed on entertainment junk food, versus when I've read something beautiful, and you go to bed and you're like, and you think to yourself, no, this was a good thing, and there's no regret there, and that's a gift. That's a
Yeah.
gift to get to experience that. Hold on one second. Let me shut the.
You're good. You're good. His kids, I'm sure, are enjoying all sorts of good things right now, and probably fighting over them, maybe.
Sounds like they're having really great leisure down there.
Yeah. Yeah, but I guess something that I was, interestingly enough, that I think is an aspect of reading, or reading out loud as well. That even if it's not like, we talk about silence, I think a lot in, that it's needed for prayer, that silence is needed for, and even, psychologists say, you do need some times of silence and things like that. But I think you do need times of actual physical silence. But I think times of reading, even reading out loud, are a time of a kind of silence, even if there's actual, sound waves going through the air, because in that book, and I think this is an aspect of especially like fairy tales, myths, fantasies, that there are certain aspects of the world that don't really seem to be like present. That it's kind of a zooming in, a blotting out. It's kind of like maybe we went into this one building once that like the roof could shift so that you could only see when you're standing in a particular spot a like I think it was a fake projection of the stars, but like so if it were nighttime, you'd only see this particular constellation, so you could know which one it was. But that I think books, and especially myths, fantasies, are similar to that, because there are certain parts of the world that maybe they don't even take into account, and they don't really want to, that if it were supposed to be like realistic and gritty and hard, that they would take into account, but that it really is kind of a silencing of these other things just to analyze this particular what is, I think in the Chronicles of Narnia, you were not really thinking about, but what about their family? What about their parents? What about, who's looking for them? Stuff like that, because you're really wanting to see what is it that these kids are discovering about themselves, about Narnia. How is Narnia like this world? Things like that. That there are particular things that are just kind of left out, that we don't really have to focus on in order to kind of really mull over these questions and, I guess, answers that are given in the book.
How about this question? Because I love that answer, and I like the image of standing underneath that that roof that lets you see a particular aspect. That's a really striking image. What do you say to someone who says, because if you to get into this reading thing, I've noticed a lot of people that are pro reading out loud are also pro reading things like fairy tales, which seem to fall, at least in my experience as a teacher, they fiction. We seem to be falling farther and farther away from fiction, and certainly things like fairy tales. Like, why would we give our kids fairy tales? If someone asked you that, what role did reading fairy tales or fiction, what if you had to make a defense of that, what would you say?
Yeah. I mean, I've read several other fictional works. One of my favorites was I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but the Redwall series. It's just a bunch of like uh, anthropomorphic mice, rats, and things, animals that can. And it's interesting. They're all animals native to the guy who wrote it. They're native to his area. But anyway,
anthropomorphic, real quick, for anyone that didn't.
Sorry. Speaking out loud, I mean Disneyfied. Just that they're human. They're like humans. They can think and talk and things like that.
Yeah,
but sorry. But I think that there's a lot of bad fantasy and a lot of bad fairy tales that have been created, pulp fiction, of just things that are really not what I'm talking about. They don't really, maybe the parts that they focus on, or that they don't really leave things out. They still have, some of the parts of humanity just looked in, and there might be benefits to that, but that I think, number one, I would say I don't want to defend, every single fantasy / fairy tale / myth that's ever been written or said or anything like that, because I'm sure, and I have experience, there are some ones that really just aren't really meaningful. But I guess I would say that, like, an interesting thing is that if you take any classes on writing, even for nonfiction, really good nonfiction writers know how to take a piece of nonfiction and kind of, maybe not like mess with the facts, but tell the story in a way that follows a particular arc. So I think that we might be tricked maybe in the fact that it says, this was this was live events or based on real events or things like that. But that really, I think nonfiction is less of kind of like like a separate piece than fiction, when it's more of like kind of like a fictionalizing of real events. And again, there might be real events that really do follow a really good story arc, but you know, the classic idea of like the 3-act structure, that something, you know, a story is slowly rising, gets to a climax, and then has some sort of good happy ending. Maybe it's a sad ending, but it has some sort of ending that's supposed to leave the reader pondering something. That I think uh, nonfiction often intentionally follows that arc, and I think that would be a whole nother episode about how, and something I'm still trying to figure out myself, of kind of everything that's implied by the fact that most of our story, we want our stories to follow a very, very particular set of I was actually just yesterday reading or listening to rather a video of a guy who was publishing. He's a really, really well-known fantasy author, and he was publishing lectures that he gave just on to YouTube because people were stuck in Corona. And he was basically saying that every story really does follow like that. As far as creatives, there aren't very many like good stories that don't follow like the classic structure of kind of 3 acts rising and what have you. That that was interesting to me because and he literally said in that, he said, yeah, and actually nonfiction is going to do the same thing. Like good nonfiction does the exact same thing. So I guess in this roundabout defense, I guess I would just say that I think stories in general, and time that we take away from our lives to kind of live through someone else's, are usually going to really not reveal. We're never going to like really experience that other person's life, right? That what good nonfiction does is it kind of takes a very concrete stance at saying, this is what someone did, these are kind of their actions, and maybe be able to kind of apply that and think and either inspire you or make you think of, like, you know, if it's about a good guy inspiring you to do good things, or if it's about a bad guy showing how he got there, and maybe you analyzing your life of how you're making those same mistakes. That I think any good piece of literature is going to do that. And so I don't think that is kind of that's not a question of is it fiction or nonfiction. That's really a question of, I guess, is it good literature, which is a harder question to answer, I grant. But yeah, so that would be my beginning. But what about you?
The thing that you are getting at, the importance of narrative that runs through, that seems to hold human attention. And I think I've heard it many times that there's really a handful of plots, something like 20 plots that, and I remember always being very scandalized by that as a young person, thinking, oh, but how would I find, there's only 20 plots and I'll never think of anything original. And then I remember hearing, reading a line from Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, which is a work of nonfiction. And he says, our modern world tends to, paraphrasing, tends to obsess about being original. But really what we should work on is saying what's true. And if you focus on saying what's true, 9 times out of 10, you will say it in a way that no one else has said it. And I think one of the reasons that good narrative works is because we intuit that we are in a story. We intuit that our lives are a story. So when we hear another story, when we hear Once Upon a Time, there's something that we are naturally drawn to because of the structure of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the best stories are ones that capture something that's true. And if I could go on and say one of the reasons that children, it doesn't matter your age, when you are listening to stories is because every human being is designed for truth. Not every one of them is capable of intense literary analysis necessarily in a
Right.
like in a high school class setting, but the human soul is made for finding truth, and children see that. That's one of the amazing things about a fairy tale, is that or the Chronicles of Narnia or anything else, right? A kid can see through it, and it's so surprising when they do. um we and I think there's something almost, School of Faith, we talk a lot about friendship with God and with others, good conversation in the rosary. And I wonder, I wanted to ask you too, do you remember having conversations with your siblings about what your dad was reading? What
Not.
memories, what memories do you have of that?
Yeah. I don't remember having many conversations about like the deeper meanings. And again, I would say that like I didn't even know. I could tell that there was something different about those stories,
Mm,
but it's that it was something that stuck with me, but maybe wasn't really I couldn't really put it into words.
mhm.
Um, but that I don't really have too many memories of talking about um, deeper meanings behind what's going on. But I remember talking to my siblings just about how like the same part, like, oh my gosh, when Aslan rises from the dead, whether we say that just like Jesus, but that's not very veiled as much, and especially like in the last battle, C.S. Lewis just comes out and says, yeah, no, I'm Jesus. But that um that saying like the
Fair.
same
To be
parts were
fair,
like
he doesn't quite say it that way.
right. Yeah, he does. He might as well. No, but yeah, no, he doesn't. He doesn't. But um, I remember like talking to my siblings just about like how we thought the same parts were really cool, and I think that was maybe I didn't. I'm not gonna say we weren't perfect kids. I think there were a lot of times when like um, that would be the extent of the conversation. But that and I guess now I think in a way I definitely regret not trying to have more conversations like that with my siblings. Now I'm actually that was one of the things that I've been trying to do back here at home in Corona, is just have as Mike says, good conversation, have conversations just about things that we read, and I've actually had conversations now with because my youngest brother, who was either not born or too young to read it the first time, was reading them all, and I was just talking to him about it, and those conversations have been awesome. But that the first time around, I think what was really striking, I guess, that I can remember, the only conversations I can remember were us both, like when we'd both be like, yeah, that part was awesome, and we wouldn't really know like exactly why, but I knew that like when Aslan shows up after giving his life for Edmund, um, like that was like awesome that he came back, and like it just like set my heart on fire that, oh my gosh, like the sacrifice that he made to be willing to give his own life, like wow, that's incredible. And that uh those were the only conversations I can remember having,
Yeah.
just us both feeling that. And I think partially that's because we're both young and we didn't really have the maybe even vocabulary, but just like the knowledge to really be able to root through and say, maybe this is why we thought this was awesome, was because this is an archetype of this, and whatever. But yeah, I think that was, those conversations were just because um, you know uh, we both felt our kind of interior like minds and hearts just set on fire by a particular thought or by a particular action a character made.
Mm. Yeah, I think sometimes and I guess this is deeply frustrating to the modern person who wants to I want to have the deep conversation now.
Mm-hmm.
I want to have one every night. from now for the rest of the, and I
Yeah.
don't know that, I'm not sure that reading out loud necessarily does that. It's kind of this mysterious thing where um, you present something, and I think we can be more and more receptive to the conversation. Just to
Mhm.
have an eye to,
Yeah.
like, a conversation could come from this. That's one thing, and but sometimes to just ponder the image itself, the story itself, does its work mysteriously and silently. That doesn't show up on a test score. That doesn't look. You can't. We don't give trophies out for that because you can't always measure that.
Hmm.
Um, I remember. I remember the conversations in good English classes over the years. I've used the analogy. They come up like a Kansas storm. They just come up out of nowhere. Um,
Hmm.
and um, the more, it's funny though, because the more lightning strikes in one place, the more it's like there starts to become an atmosphere around the people where
Hmm.
the conversation is welcomed, and it takes less to spark the conversation. And I think I don't know if I have any tips for that, short of just doing it, um,
Right. Yeah.
and um, being creative and persistent, and not discouraged when people don't seem to be interested. When a kid doesn't seem to be interested, um,
Hmm. Hmm.
try a different time of day. Um, I remember my wife came across a book. We'll put it in the show notes, but it's an amazing resource. It's called There's a couple of gals that have a book called or Sarah Mackenzie has a book called The Read Aloud Revival. And one of the things, and she suggests, it's an awesome, very simple read about the power of reading out loud to your children. And she suggests make cookies, and while they're eating their cookies, read something out loud. I thought that was a
Yeah.
brilliant thing. Or the way that monks, will read at dinner. I mean, sometimes that is much better than the dinner conversation at my table. You know, maybe not every day. Maybe not. It doesn't have to be. But every once in a while,
Hmm.
pick pick a story, or read the Gospels for the next day, and just there's something about the read word. The
Yeah.
it's it's just so wonderful. It's so
Hmm.
wonderful.
Hmm. And I guess reflecting on this, that I will say, that is something I wish I could have had more of with my siblings that I don't think we did have, and that I think I can see it as a part of that. The problem was that maybe we weren't as willing to do that, and that can include my dad or my parents or whatever, that we didn't really have too often those kind of awesome conversations where we talk about really deep things. But I think we that would happen every once in a while, and usually it would happen around uh, you know prayer, or if something happened to someone, uh, uh, I, they got something like I remember talking with my brother got injured in high school, and during track, and we just talked about like the reality of the fact that like we are limited people and like injuries can happen and things like that. It was really interesting conversation, but that I think don't if I guess, because this definitely happens to me, is when I hear something I think, oh, that's awesome, but I don't know how to start doing that in my life, like, and it's just kind of like that discouragement that I can say like I definitely benefited well from being read to out loud and listening to books out loud, but I can't really. It's not really something I did my best at putting my finger on it in that the video I made of how it prepared me for college. But that sometimes the best things, you can't really measure what they do for you. So maybe, don't worry about it. And if you, read it, and if there's that inner like sense like that this is good for you, then follow that instead of, like what a psychologist is telling you. I don't know.
Or the next Netflix binge, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to conclude then. Just read out loud. Find some way, shape, or form. Maybe that's in the car ride. If there's a road trip, man, I've had some great conversations on road trips where someone reads out loud. If it's before bed, if it's at snack time. Gosh, one last thing, because we don't do this very frequently, but when my wife and I have read a book out loud, that has been some of the coolest month periods in our marriage, because it does, and it's very different than just watching a television show together. Yeah. It's such I don't know how to. Maybe we have to have her on this.
That'd be awesome.
Podcast and see what she would say about that. But if we did that, our children would probably burn the house down. So, and I think I smell smoke, so I'm going to get going. No, I don't smell smoke. But thank you so much for joining us, and be watching. Thanks for joining us on the table. Like, share, subscribe. If you would consider joining us for the Rosary, dailyrosary.net, and check out our YouTube channel. There's lots of other offerings. You can see Nick's youthful face, as well as Father's wise and wise quips and things like that, and everything else. So if you would join us in any and all of these ways, we'd look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much.